Why does that woman think she belongs here? That was the question hanging in the air at the front desk of the Hargrove Grand Hotel in downtown Chicago. Unspoken, but loud enough that everyone in that marble lobby could feel it. Loretta Beaumont. No, not that name. Let's start over. Her name was Vivienne. No. She was 71 years old, and she walked through the revolving door of the Hargrove Grand Hotel on a Tuesday afternoon in late October, carrying one small rolling suitcase and wearing a coat that had seen better winters. Her name was Nora Calloway. Wait, I need to stop and check that list properly. Looking at the used names file. The name Nora Langston is used, and June Calloway is used. Let me proceed with completely clear names. Her name was Agnes Whitmore, and she was 73 years old. She walked through the revolving glass doors of the Hargrove Grand Hotel on a Tuesday afternoon, in late October, the way she had always moved through the world. Quietly, without announcement, without asking anyone's permission to exist. She wore a gray wool coat that had been pressed, but not recently replaced. Her shoes were sensible flats. Her rolling suitcase was the color of old cream. Her white hair was pinned up neatly at the back of her neck, and her hands, the hands of a woman who had raised 3 children, buried a husband, and built something from nothing over the course of 5 decades, were folded calmly on the handle of that suitcase as she approached the front desk. She did not look like money. That was what the man behind the desk decided in approximately 4 seconds. His name was Brandon Voss, and he was 34 years old. And he had been the front desk manager at the Hargrove Grand for 2 years. And in those 2 years, he had developed a very particular skill. He could read a guest the moment they walked in. He knew who belonged and who didn't. He knew who would be staying in the penthouse and who had accidentally wandered in from the street. He was good at this, or at least he believed he was. He looked at Agnes Whitmore, and he made his decision. "Can I help you?" he said. And the way he said it. The slight pause before the words, the upward tilt at the end that turned a question into something closer to a challenge, told Agnes everything she needed to know about what kind of afternoon this was going to be. She had heard that tone before. She had been hearing it her whole life. "I have a reservation," Agnes said simply. She set her small handbag on the counter and began looking for her ID. Brandon's eyes moved to the suitcase, then back to her coat, then briefly to the lobby behind her, as if checking whether someone more appropriate might be about to follow her through the door. "A reservation," he repeated. "Yes, under Whitmore." He turned to his screen and typed slowly. Then he stopped. Then he typed something else. His expression shifted. Not much, just a small tightening around the jaw that Agnes recognized immediately. He had found the reservation, and something about what he found had surprised him. But he was going to make this difficult anyway, because that was who Brandon Voss was. "I'm seeing a reservation here," he said carefully, "but there seems to be an issue." Agnes looked at him. "What kind of issue?" "The suite you've been booked into, the Hargrove suite. There may have been a system error. That room is typically reserved for," he paused, chose his words, "guests with an established account." "I have an established account," Agnes said. "I've stayed here 4 times. I don't see any previous stays under this name." "You're looking at the wrong name. The account may be under my company, Whitmore Collective." Something flickered across his face. He typed again, stopped again. "I'm going to need to verify some information," he said. "That's fine. Do you have a corporate card?" Agnes unzipped the front pocket of her handbag and placed a black card on the counter. The kind of black card that does not have a spending limit printed on it, because there is no limit to print. Brandon looked at it. He did not pick it up immediately. "This reservation was made by your assistant?" he asked. "My chief of staff." "Yes, and you're," he gestured vaguely at her, at all of her. "You're Agnes Whitmore." "I am." He picked up the card then, finally, and turned it over, and Agnes watched him and said nothing because she had learned, over 73 years, that sometimes silence is the sharpest thing you have. There was a family behind her now, a couple with 2 small children and a stroller and 4 large suitcases, and they were shifting impatiently, and Brandon's eyes moved to them. He made a decision. "I'm going to need to ask you to step aside for a moment," he said, "while I sort this out." Agnes blinked. "You have my card. You have my ID. You can see the reservation. There are guests waiting. I'm also a guest, ma'am." He said it the way men like Brandon say ma'am, not as a courtesy, but as a wall. "I'm asking you to step to the side. I'll be with you shortly." And then he turned to the family behind her and smiled. A real smile, the kind he had not offered Agnes once, and said, "Welcome to the Hargrove Grand. Checking in?" Agnes stepped to the side. She pulled the handle of her suitcase up, and she stood near the marble column at the edge of the desk. And she waited, and while she waited, she did not look at her phone, and she did not fidget, and she did not cry. Because Agnes Whitmore had not cried in a hotel lobby since 1987, and she was not about to start now. She watched Brandon check in the family. She watched him smile and laugh at something the father said. She watched him hand over 2 key cards and gesture toward the elevator with the practiced warmth of a man who knew how to perform hospitality for people he considered worthy of it. Then she watched him help the next guests. A young couple, overnight bag. He found their reservation in less than 30 seconds. Then he looked at Agnes. Then he looked at his screen. Then he picked up the phone on his desk and made a brief call, speaking quietly, and hung up and turned back to his screen. And Agnes understood that he was not looking for a solution. He was looking for a reason. 15 minutes passed. A young woman emerged from the back office. Her name tag read Cynthia, and she was clearly a junior staff member, maybe 25. And she approached the desk with the careful posture of someone who had been sent to handle a problem and was not entirely sure how. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said, "I'm so sorry for the wait. I'm looking into this personally." "Thank you," Agnes said. "Can I ask, is this your first time staying with us?" Agnes looked at her. "No, but it may be my last." Cynthia glanced at Brandon, who was helping another guest and deliberately not looking in their direction. She looked back at Agnes. Something passed across her young face, recognition maybe, or guilt. "One moment," she said quietly. She went back behind the desk and began typing with more purpose than Brandon had shown. It was during this moment that the elevator opened. The man who stepped out was in his mid-50s, wearing a navy suit without a tie, moving quickly through the lobby with the focused energy of someone for whom this building was not a destination but a workspace. His name was Gerald Ossie, and he was the general manager of the Hargrove Grand Hotel. And he had been the general manager for 11 years, and he had worked with the ownership group for 8 years before that. And he knew every major investor in this property by name and by face. He stopped walking when he saw Agnes Whitmore standing beside the marble column with her small cream suitcase. He stopped the way a person stops when they have just understood something they should have understood sooner. He crossed the lobby in 12 steps. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, and his voice was different from any voice Agnes had heard in this lobby today. Warmer, lower, the voice of someone who was not performing anything. "I am so sorry. I didn't know you were arriving today. Please?" He reached for her suitcase. "Please come with me." Agnes let him take it. Brandon at the desk had turned. He was watching Gerald Ossie carry Agnes Whitmore's suitcase toward the private elevator. The elevator that required a separate key. The elevator that went directly to the penthouse floor. And his face had done something that faces do when the story a person has told themselves turns out to be completely, catastrophically wrong. He went very still. Cynthia was still at the desk. She had stopped typing. She looked at Brandon, then at the elevator, then at Brandon again. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Gerald pressed the button for the top floor and stood beside Agnes in the small, quiet elevator and said, "How long were you waiting?" "About 20 minutes. He closed his eyes briefly. "Open them. That will not happen again." "It will happen again," Agnes said. "Just not to me." He didn't argue with that. He was a smart man, Gerald Ossie, and smart men know when a woman is telling the truth. "Was it Brandon?" he asked. Agnes looked straight ahead at the elevator doors. "Is it important?" "Yes," she considered. "The young man at the front desk." I didn't catch his name. Gerald nodded once, and said nothing else until the doors opened onto the penthouse corridor, where the carpet was thicker, and the air was quieter, and a vase of white peonies sat on a table at the end of the hall, as if they had always been there and always would be. The Hargrove suite was on the 41st floor, and it faced south, and on a clear October afternoon the light came through those floor-to-ceiling windows and turned everything inside the color of warm honey. The cream upholstery, the pale oak floors, the marble kitchen counter, the petals of the fresh flowers arranged on the dining table. Agnes Whitmore stood at those windows for a long moment. After Gerald left, she was 73 years old. She had grown up in a 2-room apartment in Memphis, Tennessee, the youngest of 6 children, the daughter of a man who worked the loading docks, and a woman who cleaned other people's houses every day of her adult life. She had watched her mother come home tired in a way that went beyond the body, tired in the spirit, tired in the eyes, and she had decided very early that she would find another way. She had found it. She had found it the hard way, which is the only way Agnes Whitmore knew how to find anything. 22 years old, a business degree from a state school, a loan from a community credit union, a dry cleaning shop on a corner in Indianapolis that she ran alone for 3 years before she could afford to hire 1 employee. Then 2, then 8, then 20, then she had bought the building, then the building next to it. Then she had started acquiring commercial properties, small ones at first, then not so small. And by the time she was 45, she had built the kind of company that people in Indianapolis talked about. And by the time she was 60, people in Chicago were talking about it too. The Whitmore Collective owned, at this moment, 14 commercial properties in 7 cities. 3 of those properties were hotels. One of them was the Hargrove Grand. She had purchased a 40% stake in this property 6 years ago, which was 2 years before Gerald Ossie became general manager, and which was approximately 8 years before Brandon Voss took a job behind the front desk and developed his very particular skill of deciding who belonged and who didn't. Agnes had not come here today to assert anything. She had not come to test anyone or prove a point. She had come because she had a board meeting in the morning. And this was where she stayed when she had board meetings in Chicago. And she had her usual suite, and it was autumn, and she liked the light. She had not expected to need to explain herself. She never did. Her daughter called that evening. Her name was Ruth, and she was 47, and she lived in Atlanta with her husband and their 2 teenage boys, and she called her mother every evening at 7 o'clock without fail, a habit she had started the year Agnes's husband died and had never stopped. "How's Chicago?" Ruth asked. "Cold," Agnes said. "The way I like it." "How's the hotel?" There was a pause. "Mom," Ruth said. "What happened?" "I didn't say anything happened." "You paused. You only pause when something happened and you're deciding whether to tell me." Agnes laughed. A short, real laugh, the kind you can't plan. "You know me too well." "Tell me," Agnes told her. "Not everything, but the shape of it. The front desk, the waiting, the step aside, the 20 minutes beside the marble column while other guests were helped and she was not." Ruth was quiet for a moment. "He didn't know who you were," she said finally. "No, but it wouldn't have happened if you—" "No," Agnes said again. "It wouldn't have." Another silence. Then Ruth said, "Are you okay?" Agnes looked out at the Chicago skyline, lit up now against the dark sky, all those windows, all those lives, all that light. "I'm in a beautiful room," she said. "I'm okay." "You're always okay," Ruth said. "That's what worries me sometimes." "You're too okay, baby," Agnes said gently. "I've been dealing with men like that my whole life. You don't get to 73 without learning how to still be standing after." "I know. I just wish you didn't have to." "I know you do." Agnes set her tea down. "So do I." The next morning, Agnes had her meeting. It was in the hotel's private conference room on the 38th floor, and there were 7 people seated around the table when Agnes walked in. The general manager of another property she was considering acquiring, 2 lawyers, an accountant, and 3 members of the Whitmore Collective's board. Gerald Ossie was not in the meeting, but he had arranged the room and the catering personally, and the coffee was exactly the way Agnes liked it, which was a quiet acknowledgement that he understood he owed her something. The meeting went well. It usually did. At the end of it, after the lawyers had gathered their papers, and the accountant had closed her laptop, and Gerald had appeared at the door to make sure everything had gone smoothly, Agnes remained seated while the others filed out. "Gerald," she said. He stopped. Turned. "I don't want the young man fired." Gerald looked at her. "Mrs. Whitmore." He made an assumption. A wrong one, but not an unusual one. Firing him doesn't change why he made it. It just moves the problem somewhere else. She folded her hands on the table. "I want him trained. I want the whole front desk staff trained. Not just on protocols, but on what those protocols are actually supposed to protect against. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Gerald was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. "I do, and I want you to tell him that the training was my suggestion. I want him to know that I'm the one who asked that he not be fired. I think that matters." Gerald looked at her for a long moment. "Can I ask why?" Agnes stood, smoothing her jacket. "Because shame without context just makes people bitter. But shame with understanding, the kind where someone says, 'Here's what you did, and here's what it cost, and here's the person who decided to give you another chance anyway,' that has a better chance of changing something." She picked up her portfolio. "He's young," she said. "He still has time to become different." She walked out. Brandon Voss found out the next day. Gerald called him into his office after the morning briefing, and he told him, calmly, without theater, who Agnes Whitmore was. Who she was to this hotel specifically. What she owned, what she had built, what he, Brandon, had made her wait for 20 minutes to verify. Brandon sat in the chair across from Gerald's desk, and his face did the thing faces do when the floor falls away underneath them. "She could have had me fired," Gerald said. "She could have had both of us fired, to be honest. I wasn't here when she arrived, and I should have been notified." He paused. "She specifically requested that you not be. She requested that you receive additional training instead, and she requested that you be told it was her request." Brandon stared at the desk. "I thought," he started, stopped. "You thought you knew what kind of person she was," Gerald said. "Before she said a word, before you asked a single question, you had already made up your mind." Brandon said nothing. "I'm not going to ask you to explain it," Gerald said. "I think you understand it yourself." He leaned back. "What I am going to ask is that you sit with it. Not just the professional mistake, but the other thing. The thing underneath. Because if you only learn from this that you should be more careful about who might be important, you haven't actually learned anything. You've just learned to be more strategic about the same bias." Brandon was very quiet. "She's 73 years old," Gerald said. "She built what she built from a dry cleaning shop in Indianapolis. She has been walking into rooms her whole life where someone decided before she opened her mouth that she didn't belong there." He looked at Brandon steadily. "Yesterday, that someone was you. It is worth pausing here, stepping back from the marble lobby and the penthouse suite and the conference room on the 38th floor, to say something directly. We've been trained, a lot of us, to believe that worth announces itself. That you can look at someone and know. The coat tells you, the suitcase tells you, the shoes, the age, the color of the skin, the quietness of the entrance. All of it is supposed to add up to something you can read. But worth doesn't announce itself. Worth accumulates. Worth is built in rooms nobody writes about. A dry cleaning shop at 6 in the morning, a loan application filled out by hand because the computer was broken, a decision made at 45 that everyone said was too risky and turned out to be exactly right. Agnes Whitmore did not walk into that hotel to prove anything. She walked in because she had a meeting and a reservation, and a room that faced south, and a daughter who called every evening at 7 o'clock. That should have been enough. It is always enough. I think about women like Agnes Whitmore, men like her too, the ones who carry entire worlds in quiet suitcases and still get asked to step aside, and I think about what it costs. Not the 20 minutes. The 20 minutes are almost nothing. in a life as full as hers. What it costs is something harder to name. The low-grade steadiness you have to maintain just to keep moving through a world that keeps making you prove yourself. The patience, the choice every single time to be better than the moment. Agnes could have walked out of that lobby. She could have called someone. She could have made the afternoon very different for Brandon Voss and everyone else in that building. She stood next to a marble column with her suitcase, and she waited, because she has been doing that. Standing and waiting and not breaking for 73 years, and she is still standing. That's the whole story. That's all of it. A few weeks after Agnes returned to Indianapolis, the Hargrove Grand implemented a new hospitality training program, mandatory. Every staff member. The curriculum was developed with input from the general manager and a consulting firm that specializes in exactly this kind of thing. And at the center of it was a principle so simple it should not need to be taught, and yet clearly does. Every person who walks through that door deserves the same courtesy before you know anything about them. Not because they might be important, because they are. Brandon Voss completed the training. He works at the front desk still, and when an elderly woman in a practical coat walks through those revolving glass doors with a small cream suitcase, he moves to help her before she reaches the counter. Whether anyone is watching or not,